The fluorescent lights in my office hummed their familiar tune as I arrived at 6:30 a.m., same as every day for the past 15 years. March 15th, 40 years old today. The thought sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. Heavy and uncomfortable, a reminder of time passing without celebration. I'd started coming in early when I was 25. Fresh out of college with an accounting degree and dreams of starting my own firm someday. Back then, the early mornings were about ambition, about getting ahead, about building something for myself. Now they were about necessity, the extra billable hours that covered Tyler's latest crisis, whatever it might be this month. "Morning, James," Sarah, my assistant, chirped as she set a steaming cup of coffee on my desk. She'd been doing this for 3 years now, learning exactly how I liked it. Black, no sugar, hot enough to burn away the taste of disappointment. "Happy birthday! Any big plans?" I forced a smile, the same one I'd been perfecting since childhood. The one that said everything was fine, that I didn't need anything, that I was content being the reliable one. Just another day, you know how it is. But it wasn't just another day, was it? It was my 40th birthday, and I'd spent every single birthday for the past decade working overtime, picking up extra clients, billing more hours to cover whatever financial emergency my family had manufactured. Tyler's food truck venture that crashed and burned after 6 months, Tyler's music equipment when his band was supposedly on the verge of making it big, Tyler's life coaching certification when he decided he was meant to help people find their purpose. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on me. Tyler helping people find purpose while I'd lost sight of mine entirely. My office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown with a view of the river and the mountains beyond. When I'd first gotten this corner office 5 years ago, I'd imagined calling my family to share the news. I'd pictured their excitement, their pride in what I'd accomplished. Instead, I'd called Tyler first to tell him I could increase his monthly allowance. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. Tyler's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach clenched with the familiar mixture of dread and guilty hope. Dread because I knew he needed something. Hope because maybe, just maybe, he was calling to wish me happy birthday. "Hey bro, you got a minute? I need some advice." Not happy birthday. Never happy birthday. "What's up, Ty?" "Remember how I've been talking about opening a brewery? Well, I think it's finally time to pull the trigger. I've been doing so much research, and craft beer is totally having a moment right now. Like, a real moment." I had heard variations of this speech before. Different passion, same desperate enthusiasm that burned bright for a few months before flickering out. The organic farm, the food truck, the band, the life coaching business, each one was going to be the one. The thing that finally made Tyler successful, made our parents proud, justified all the money I'd poured into his dreams. "That's interesting," I said carefully, switching my phone to speaker so I could pull up my banking app. "How are you planning to fund it?" Right. I'm working on all that. I've got spreadsheets and everything. Very professional." I could hear the grin in his voice, the boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Hey, I gotta run, but we should celebrate your birthday soon. Maybe this weekend." My heart did a stupid little leap. "This weekend?" "Yeah, totally. We'll figure something out. Talk soon." He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone with that familiar cocktail of hope and disappointment churning in my stomach. I waited for the follow-up text asking how much I could spare for the brewery venture, but it didn't come. That was new. Usually the ask came within minutes of the setup conversation. The day dragged like they all did. Numbers on spreadsheets blurred together as I found myself thinking about birthdays past. When I was 8, Mom made me a chocolate cake shaped like a baseball glove because I'd just made the Little League team. When I turned 16, Dad let me drive his pickup truck around the farm, teaching me to work the clutch while we talked about my plans for college. When I graduated with my CPA license at 24, they'd thrown me a surprise party at the local steakhouse. When had I stopped mattering enough for cake, for parties, for phone calls that weren't requests for money? I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering to a conversation I'd had with my therapist, the one I'd started seeing after my last relationship imploded. Jennifer had been her name, and she'd been patient for 2 years before finally admitting she felt like she was dating a ghost. "You're never really present," she said during our last fight. "Even when you're physically here, part of you is always somewhere else, worrying about your family, planning how to fix their next crisis. I don't think you even know who you are when you're not solving someone else's problems." She'd been right, of course. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, had helped me see the patterns, the way I'd learned to derive worth from being useful, from being the one who fixed things, who provided solutions, who never needed anything in return. She'd used words like codependent and enabling and loss of self, but they felt too clinical for the hollow ache in my chest. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" she'd asked during our last session. I'd sat in her office for 10 minutes trying to think of an answer. The afternoon crawled by. At 3, my phone rang again. Mom this time. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and my heart jumped again. "How's your day going?" "It's good, Mom. Really good." I waited for her to remember, to acknowledge what day it was. "That's wonderful. Listen, I wanted to ask you about something. Your father and I have been talking, and we think Tyler is really onto something with this brewery idea. He's been working so hard on the business plan." Tyler working hard. That was rich. Has he? Oh, yes. He's been at the library every day, researching the craft beer industry. Did you know that microbreweries are experiencing unprecedented growth? Tyler explained it all to us last night. He's really matured, James. I think this could be the thing that finally helps him find his way. The thing that finally helps him find his way. As if the previous disasters hadn't happened. As if the thousands of dollars in debt he'd accumulated didn't exist. As if his 35 years of false starts were just preparation for this moment of clarity. That's great, Mom. We were hoping you might be able to help him with the financial planning side of things. You know how good you are with numbers."
There it was, the real reason for the call. Not to wish me happy birthday, not to check on my life, but to recruit me for Tyler's latest venture. I'd be happy to take a look at his business plan, I lied. "Oh, wonderful! We're having dinner on Sunday. You should come by and Tyler can show you everything." Sunday, 2 days after my birthday. Sounds good. Perfect. Oh, and James. My heart lifted one more time. Here it comes. Happy birthday, sweetheart. We love you. We're proud of you. Could you stop by the store and pick up some of that wine your father likes? The expensive kind? Tyler's bringing someone special to dinner and we want everything to be perfect. The expensive wine for Tyler's date on the weekend of my birthday. "Of course, Mom. You're such a good son. I don't know what we'd do without you." She hung up, leaving me staring at my computer screen where I'd been building a financial model for a client's retirement planning. 40 years of helping everyone secure their futures while neglecting my own. I left work at 5, early for me, and drove through the March evening with something like hope fluttering in my chest. Maybe they'd planned something. Maybe Mom's call was a distraction, a way to throw me off the scent. Maybe Tyler's vague promise about celebrating this weekend was real. Maybe I'd walk into my apartment to find them all there, sheepish and grinning, finally ready to celebrate me the way they celebrated him. My apartment building was a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of place I'd chosen because it felt creative and alive, because I'd thought it might inspire me to pursue the photography hobby I'd abandoned when Tyler needed money for music equipment. The exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures looked sophisticated in the real estate photos, but after 3 years of living there, they just felt cold. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, keys ready, heart hammering with possibility. I turned the lock and pushed open the door to darkness. My apartment was empty, silent. The only light came from the digital clock on my microwave, 5:47 p.m. No messages on my phone except one from my credit card company wishing me a happy birthday and offering me a higher credit limit. Even my bank cared more than my family. I stood in my kitchen, still wearing my coat, staring at the bottle of champagne I'd bought 3 weeks ago. Just in case. In case someone remembered. In case someone cared enough to acknowledge that I'd made it another year around the sun, that I was still here, still standing, still available to solve their problems and fund their dreams. The champagne looked expensive and foolish in the fluorescent light of my kitchen. I ordered Chinese takeout and ate it standing at my counter, scrolling through social media. Tyler's Instagram was full of photos from some craft beer festival he attended last weekend, artistic shots of foam and amber liquid, hashtags about research and project passions and living the dream. 47 likes on the most recent post. Tyler had more people celebrating his research trip than I had calling on my birthday. At 7:30, my phone finally rang. Mom again. "James, honey, can you come over for dinner? We're having a family meeting." My heart jumped despite everything. A family meeting? Maybe this was it. The surprise, just delayed by a few hours. A family meeting? Tyler has some exciting news to share. Really exciting. Can you be here by 8? Of course. Of course it was about Tyler. But maybe his exciting news was that he'd remembered my birthday, that he'd planned something special, that for once I was going to be the center of attention instead of the wallet in the background. I'll be there. I drove across town to my parents' house, the same split-level ranch where I'd grown up, where my height marks are still penciled on the doorframe of the utility closet, where my high school graduation photo sat on the mantle next to Tyler's senior portrait when he was 22 years old and finally finished high school. I walked up the driveway, past Dad's meticulously maintained flower beds and Mom's collection of garden gnomes, and let myself in through the front door. The smell hit me immediately. Mom's pot roast. The one she made for special occasions. My heart lifted again. Maybe this really was for me. I walked into the dining room to find streamers hanging from the chandelier and a congratulations banner stretched across the wall. Tyler sat at the head of the table, my father's usual spot, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Mom and Dad flanked him on either side, beaming with pride. The special china was out, the good silverware, the crystal glasses that only came out for holidays and celebrations. Everything they hadn't done for my college graduation, my promotion to senior manager, my corner office, my 15 years of steady employment and financial responsibility. "James, perfect timing," Mom beamed, jumping up to hug me. Tyler was just about to tell us his big news. Dad clapped Tyler on the back, the gesture warm and proud and familiar. "This is it, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what you were meant to do, son." Son. When was the last time Dad called me son with that tone of voice? When was the last time he'd looked at me with that expression of pure, uncomplicated pride? "How did you manage the funding?" I asked, though something cold was already creeping up my spine like ice water in my veins. Tyler's grin widened, if that was possible. Mom and Dad came through with some seed money, $50,000. The world tilted sideways. The pot roast smell turned nauseated. 50,000? From our emergency fund, Dad said proudly. His chest puffed out like he'd just announced he was funding the moon landing. We've been saving for years, waiting for the right opportunity to invest in one of our children's futures. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Emergency fund? The words came out strangled, barely audible, but loud enough for Tyler to pause in his victory speech about hops and fermentation and changing the world one pint at a time. Because 5 years ago exactly, I could remember the date because it was the week after my 35th birthday, another birthday that had passed without acknowledgement. I'd asked them for help with a business loan, just $10,000 to get my consulting firm off the ground. I had clients lined up, a solid business plan, projections showing profitability within 18 months.
They told me they were stretched thin. Dad's back surgery had depleted their savings, they'd said. Mom's part-time job at the library didn't pay much. They couldn't afford to help. They were sorry, but I needed to be more realistic about my dreams, more practical about what was possible for someone like me. Someone like me. Not someone like Tyler, apparently. Tyler was still talking, gesturing expansively with his beer. The grand opening is next weekend. This is going to be incredible, you guys. We're thinking of having live music, maybe some food trucks, really make it an event. James, you have to come. It's going to be the party of the year. Next weekend? My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. Saturday night, March 22nd. I'm thinking we'll start around 7, run until midnight or later. Really celebrate properly. Tyler's eyes were bright with excitement, with the manic energy that always accompanied his new ventures. We'll have local bands, craft food, the whole 9 yards. Saturday is my birthday. The room went quiet so suddenly it felt like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from celebratory to confused to something that might have been embarrassment. Tyler blinked, his beer halfway to his lips. Oh, right, your birthday. Oh, right. Like it was a minor scheduling conflict, a small detail he'd overlooked while planning the event of the year. Tyler snapped his fingers, the sound sharp in the silence. Perfect! We can celebrate both things at once. How awesome is that? Your 40th birthday at my brewery opening. It's like fate, you know? Like the universe aligning. Dad's face lit up again, relief washing over his features. What a great idea! What a perfect way to make Tyler's big day even more special. Even more special. Tyler's big day. My birthday was going to be a footnote to his grand opening. You can help us set up earlier in the day, Mom added, already making mental lists, already turning me back into the reliable one who handled logistics. You're so good at organizing things, and Tyler's going to be busy with last-minute preparations. I stared at them, really stared at them, as if I was seeing them clearly for the first time. These people who'd raised me, who'd sung me happy birthday for 39 years, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework and cheered at my Little League games. These people who were now casually planning to use my 40th birthday as background music for Tyler's latest adventure. Mom was already pulling out her phone, probably to start a group text about party planning. Dad was asking Tyler about the music lineup. Tyler was sketching out seating arrangements on a napkin, completely absorbed in his vision of craft beer glory. None of them were looking at me. None of them had noticed that I hadn't responded to the suggestion. None of them had asked if I wanted my birthday combined with Tyler's opening, if I had other plans, if I minded being relegated to the supporting cast of my own celebration. I should go, I said quietly. But we haven't even discussed the details yet. Mom protested, looking up from her phone. "Tyler needs help figuring out the layout, and you're so practical about these things. Plus, we need to coordinate the food situation, and someone needs to handle the music setup. And..." I said I should go. There was something in my tone that made them all pause. Tyler's napkin sketch stopped mid-line. Dad's questions about sound equipment died on his lips. Mom's phone lowered to the table. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Mom asked, her voice taking on that tone of concerned motherhood that I hadn't heard directed at me in years. A little off? Like my reaction to having my birthday hijacked was somehow unreasonable. Like my 40 years of life were less important than Tyler's brewing ambitions. "I'm fine," I lied, because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. "Just tired from work." "Well, make sure you get some rest," Dad said, already turning back to Tyler. "We're going to need your help making this the best brewery opening this town has ever seen." I walked to my car in a daze, their voices fading behind me as they dove back into party planning. The March air was cold against my face, sharp and clean in a way that made everything feel surreal, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. I drove aimlessly for an hour, through neighborhoods I barely recognized, past strip malls and gas stations and the community college where I'd taken photography classes before Tyler needed money for his band. I ended up in the parking lot of the grocery store near my apartment, staring at the neon signs and trying to make sense of what just happened. $50,000. They had $50,000 in an emergency fund when I'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for Tyler's emergencies. They'd been saving for years, waiting for the right opportunity to invest in one of their children's futures, while I'd been sacrificing my own future to keep Tyler afloat. I walked through the automatic doors and wandered the aisles like a ghost, my feet carrying me through produce and dairy and frozen foods without any conscious direction. I found myself in the bakery section, staring at a display of individual cupcakes in plastic containers. Birthday cupcakes, complete with rainbow sprinkles and plastic roses. They looked ridiculous and sad and perfect. I bought one. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, the same combination as that baseball glove cake from when I was 8, and added a single candle at the checkout. The teenage cashier wished me a happy birthday when she saw the candle, and I almost started crying right there in the fluorescent brightness of aisle 12. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with my pathetic cupcake and lit the candle with shaking hands. The flame danced in the darkness, casting shadows on the walls of my carefully constructed life, shadows that looked like prison bars. 40 years old, half my life over, maybe more, and what did I have to show for it? A corner office and a job that paid well but didn't inspire me, an apartment that looked like a magazine spread but felt like a hotel room, a family who loved me for what I could provide but didn't know who I was underneath the checkbook. I pulled out a notebook, the same kind I used for client meetings, and started writing. My hands were steadier than I had expected. Things I've sacrificed for Tyler. The list came easier than breathing. $15,000 for the food truck disaster. I'd used my vacation fund. $8,000 for music equipment he used exactly twice, my emergency savings. $12,000 for 2 years of rent when he was finding himself. I'd taken on extra clients, worked weekends. $3,000 for life coaching certification he never completed. Money I'd saved for a new camera. $5,000 for his emergency car repairs after he wrecked it street racing. He wrecked it again 3 months later. $6,000 for his credit card debt from his organic farming phase. I'd consolidated it with my own debt. $4,000 for his ex-girlfriend's medical bills. She'd left him the day after I sent the check. $6,000 for his credit card debt from his organic farming phase. I'd consolidated it with my own debt. The financial list filled half a page, but the other sacrifices were harder to quantify. I bought a ticket to some action movie I'd never heard of and sat in the dark theater, surrounded by strangers eating overpriced popcorn and drinking sodas the size of small children. The movie was terrible. Explosions and car chases and dialogue that sounded like it had been written by committee. But it was mine. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, I was doing something purely for myself, something that had nothing to do with Tyler's needs or my family's expectations. When I came out, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, I felt different somehow, lighter, like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. I went home and took a long shower, put on clothes I liked instead of clothes that were practical, and cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with sauce I made from scratch, but it was food I wanted to eat, prepared the way I liked it, eaten at my own pace without interruption. At 8 o'clock, I finally turned my phone back on. I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I scrolled through them, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask if I was okay, to worry about where I'd been, to remember that today was supposed to be about me too. Instead, "Where the hell are you?" Tyler, 2:47 p.m. "We need help with the sound system." Dad, 3:15 p.m. "Tyler is really stressed. Where are you?" Mom, 3:22 p.m. "The beer taps still aren't working." Tyler, 3:45 p.m. "People are starting to arrive and asking where you are." Mom, 4:30 p.m. "This is really important to Tyler. He needs his family here." Dad, 5:15 p.m. "You're embarrassing him." Mom, 6 p.m. "I can't believe you're doing this on my big night." Tyler, 7:30 p.m. Not one person had asked if I was safe. Not one person had wondered if something terrible had happened to me. Not one person had remembered it was my birthday too. They were angry at me for letting Tyler down, for failing to fulfill my role as the reliable one, the problem solver, the invisible support system that made Tyler's dreams possible. I started laughing, sitting alone in my kitchen with my phone full of accusatory messages, deep, hysterical laughter that turned into something that might have been sobbing if I'd let it continue. 40 years old, and I'd just figured out that I didn't matter to the people who were supposed to love me most. I mattered only as a function. I was valuable only as a service provider. I was loved only for what I could give, not for who I was. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it was oddly liberating. The next morning, I called my supervisor and asked about the Portland office transfer I'd been offered 2 years ago. It had been a good opportunity then, better pay, more responsibility, a chance to work with some of the firm's biggest clients. I'd turned it down because Tyler had just started the food truck business and needed financial support. "Is the Portland position still available?" I asked. "Well, actually, yes," Linda said, sounding surprised but pleased. "We've been hoping you'd reconsider. The team out there has specifically asked for someone with your background. When could you start? How soon could you make it happen?" "Well, there are some logistics to work out, but if you're serious about this, I could have you transferred within a month, maybe sooner." I'm serious. Very serious. More serious than I'd ever been about anything in my adult life. When Tyler called that afternoon, I almost didn't answer. The phone rang 5 times before I picked up, and even then I considered letting it go to voicemail. "Dude, what the hell happened yesterday? Everyone was asking where you were. Mom is freaking out, Dad's pissed, and I honestly don't know what to tell people." "Tell them I was busy." "Busy? James, it was my opening night. The biggest night of my life, and my own brother couldn't be bothered to show up?" His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to follow me around the house, desperate for attention and approval. Do you know how embarrassing that was? It was also my birthday. Silence, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Right, but we talked about combining them. It would have been perfect.
Your birthday celebration at my brewery opening. Everyone would have been there. It would have been this amazing party for both of us. Perfect for who, Tyler? For both of us. I don't understand why you're being weird about this. Look, the brewery did great, by the way. Thanks for asking. We had over 200 people show up, sold almost all our opening night inventory, got some great photos for social media. It was everything I dreamed it would be. Everything he dreamed. No mention of what I might have dreamed for my 40th birthday. No acknowledgement that his perfect night had required the sacrifice of mine. That's great, Tyler. I'm happy for you. Are you? Because you don't sound happy. You sound, I don't know, different. Maybe I was different. Maybe spending a birthday alone for the first time in decades had shown me something about who I was when I wasn't busy being who everyone else needed me to be. I'm moving to Portland. What? Why? For work. I got a transfer opportunity. But what about the brewery? What if I need help with the business side of things? You know I'm not good with numbers and spreadsheets and all that financial stuff. There it was. Not, I'll miss you, or what about our relationship, or how can I support you in this big change? Just worry about who would handle his spreadsheets. You'll figure it out. But James! I hung up. The call started immediately. Mom crying about how I was abandoning the family during Tyler's big moment. Dad demanding to know what had gotten into me, asking if I was having some kind of midlife crisis. Tyler leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about how the brewery was more complicated than he expected and he needed someone reliable to help him figure out the business operations. Someone reliable. That's all I'd ever been to them. Not a son, not a brother, not a person with dreams and feelings and needs of my own. Just someone reliable who fixed their problems and funded their adventures and then disappeared into the background until the next crisis required my attention. I let the calls go to voicemail. I let the guilt wash over me and then recede, like waves on a beach. I'd been drowning in their needs for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to keep my head above water. I spent the next 3 weeks methodically dismantling the life I'd built around their expectations. I packed my belongings, sold furniture that wouldn't make the cross-country move, closed accounts and forwarded mail and arranged for utilities to be transferred. 15 years in this city, and my entire life fit into boxes that could be loaded onto a moving truck in 4 hours. I'd lived small to leave room for everyone else's big dreams. The process was oddly therapeutic. Each box I packed felt like shedding weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Books I never had time to read because I was too busy working extra hours to fund Tyler's ventures. Kitchen equipment I never used because I was always too exhausted from managing everyone else's crises to cook for myself. Photography equipment I'd sold years ago but somehow still had the empty cases for, like shrines to abandoned dreams.
My own business loan application. I'd withdrawn it to avoid competing with Tyler's needs. Sarah, the architect I dated for 8 months. She'd left because I canceled 3 dates to handle Tyler's crises. Jennifer, who I'd actually loved. She'd said I was already married to my family. The house I'd never bought because my down payment kept going to Tyler's dreams. The vacation to Ireland I'd planned for my 38th birthday. Tyler's food truck had needed a last-minute loan. My photography hobby. I'd sold my camera and lenses to pay Tyler's credit card bill. The consulting firm I dreamed of starting. Couldn't take the risk with Tyler depending on my steady income. Graduate school. I'd been accepted to an MBA program but couldn't afford it after Tyler's band almost made it. The list filled 2 pages. $43,000 in direct payments. 7 years of my life spent working extra hours to fund his adventures. 2 serious relationships destroyed by my inability to prioritize anything above Tyler's needs. Countless dreams deferred and then forgotten,
buried under the weight of being the reliable one. When had I become this invisible? When had Tyler's wants started mattering more than my needs? When had I stopped being a person and become just a solution to other people's problems? I thought about the conversation at dinner, the casual way they dismissed my birthday, the automatic assumption that I'd be thrilled to share my special day with Tyler's business venture. I thought about the emergency fund, $50,000 they'd claimed didn't exist when I'd needed help, but magically appeared when Tyler had a dream to chase. I thought about Mom wiping away tears of pride for Tyler's brewery announcement and tried to remember the last time she'd cried over one of my accomplishments. My promotion to senior manager had earned a distracted, "That's nice, dear," during a phone call about Tyler's latest girlfriend drama. My corner office had been acknowledged with a suggestion that the extra money might help Tyler with his rent. Everything I achieved was measured by how it could benefit Tyler. Everything I earned was seen as a resource for Tyler's dreams. I wasn't a son in their eyes. I was a support system for their real son, the one that mattered, the one whose happiness was worth more than mine. I blew out my candle and made a wish. For the first time in my adult life, I made a wish that had nothing to do with anyone else's happiness. I wished for the courage to disappear. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and spent the day researching apartments in other cities. Portland looked appealing. Good food scene, creative energy, mountains and ocean within driving distance. Austin had opportunities in my field, plus music and culture, and the kind of life that looked interesting on Instagram. Denver offered outdoor adventures and a thriving business community. All of them offered something my current city couldn't: the chance to be someone new, someone who wasn't defined by his usefulness to Tyler's latest crisis. I started small, the way I'd learned to handle any major project. Opened a new checking account at a different bank across town. Changed my direct deposit to split my paycheck between my old account and the new one. 60% to the old account to maintain appearances, 40% to the new account to build my escape fund. When Tyler called that afternoon asking for help with brewery insurance costs, apparently craft brewing required more coverage than he'd anticipated, I told him I was having car trouble and couldn't spare anything right now. The lie came easier than I'd expected, rolling off my tongue like it had been waiting there for years. Car trouble? Tyler sounded genuinely surprised, as if the concept of me having problems that required money was foreign to him. What's wrong with it? I improvised. Transmission issues. The mechanic says it's going to be expensive. Man, that sucks. Well, hopefully you can get it fixed soon. The insurance thing is kind of urgent. No offer to help with my fictional car trouble. No suggestion that he could ask someone else for brewery money. Just disappointment that his ATM was temporarily out of order. "I'll see what I can do," I said. Another lie that felt like liberation. The week passed in a blur of normal activities that felt completely surreal. I went to work, had meetings, reviewed financial statements, provided strategic advice to clients who paid me well for my expertise. But underneath the routine, I was planning my escape with the same methodical approach I brought to corporate restructuring. I researched moving companies and found one that could pack and transport my belongings with minimal notice. I looked into apartment rentals in my target cities, focusing on places I could secure with a credit check and deposit, no local references required. I started transferring money to the new account in smaller amounts to avoid any automatic alerts that might show up in family conversations. Most importantly, I stopped answering Tyler's calls immediately. I let them go to voicemail first, listened to the messages, and responded only if necessary. The messages followed a predictable pattern: enthusiasm about the brewery, requests for advice, casual mentions of needing money for equipment or licensing or marketing materials. I deleted most of them without responding. Saturday arrived like a sentencing hearing. My actual birthday, the day that was supposed to be about me, had been transformed into Tyler's brewery opening prep day. My phone buzzed all morning with updates about the big event. Mom at 8 a.m. "Tyler's so nervous.
This is such a big day for him. What time can you be here to help set up? Dad, at 9 a.m. The sound equipment is being delivered at 10. Tyler needs someone who understands technical stuff. Tyler, at 9:30 a.m. Dude, where are you? We need to start setting up tables and the beer taps aren't working right. Tyler, at 10 a.m. Seriously, I could use some help here. This is harder than I thought. Tyler, at 10:30 a.m. Are you coming or not? People are going to start showing up soon. I turned off my phone and went to the movies. Alone. On my 40th birthday.
I found things I'd forgotten I owned. An acceptance letter to graduate school, carefully filed away and never acted upon because Tyler's band was struggling financially and needed my support. A business plan I'd written for my own consulting firm, complete with market analysis and financial projections, abandoned when Tyler's food truck required a co-signer for the loan. A stack of birthday cards from friends who'd gradually stopped inviting me to things because I always had to cancel for family emergencies. The cards were the worst. Evidence of relationships I'd let wither because Tyler's needs always came first. Sarah, the architect who'd made me laugh until my sides hurt. Jennifer, who'd seen something in me I'd forgotten existed. Marcus, from college, who'd invited me to his wedding 5 years ago. An invitation I'd declined because Tyler was having relationship problems and needed someone to listen to him process his feelings for hours on end. I'd chosen Tyler over everything, everyone, every time. And Tyler had never once chosen me. 2 weeks into packing, Tyler showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard his distinctive knock, 3 short raps followed by 2 long ones, the same pattern we'd used as kids when we wanted to sneak into each other's rooms after bedtime. For a moment, hearing that familiar rhythm, I felt a flutter of the old affection, the protective instinct that had defined our relationship for decades. Then I opened the door and saw his face, not concerned or sad about my leaving, but stressed and desperate in the way that always preceded a request for money. "James, we need to talk." He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well, clothes that were rumpled and slightly stale. The brewery opening high had clearly worn off, replaced by the harsh reality of actually running a business. I kept packing while he talked, folding sweaters and wrapping dishes in newspaper. About what? The brewery is, harder than I expected, more expensive. The profit margins are really tight, and we're having some cash flow issues. I might need some financial help to keep it afloat for the next few months. There it was, the real reason for the visit. Not to talk about why I was leaving, not to discuss our relationship, not to ask what he could do to repair the damage, just another request for money to solve his latest crisis. I don't have any money to spare. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean? I mean, I don't have extra money to give you. Moving is expensive. Starting over in a new city requires capital. I need to keep my resources for myself. But you always figure something out. You could take out a loan or use your credit cards or maybe ask for an advance at work. No. The word hung in the air between us, simple and final. Tyler blinked, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing. No? No, I'm not funding your dreams anymore, Tyler. I'm done. But I'm your brother. Am I yours? He looked genuinely confused, like the question didn't make sense. What's that supposed to mean? I stopped packing and turned to face him fully. When's my birthday, Tyler? Your birthday? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around my apartment as if the answer might be written on the walls. I don't know, sometime in March? March 15th. It was last Saturday, the same day as your brewery opening. And it's been March 15th for 40 years, but you've never once remembered it without being reminded. Birthdays aren't that important. What's my favorite color? Silence. What did I study in college? More silence, although I could see him trying to remember, actually making an effort for once. Too little too late. What's the name of the woman I dated for 3 years? The one I was planning to marry before she left me because I was never available for her. Tyler's mouth opened and closed silently. After 40 years as my brother, he had no idea who I was beyond my bank account and my willingness to solve his problems. What's my dream, Tyler? What's the one thing I've always wanted to do with my life? He stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, frustration, and something that might have been panic. Look, I know I'm not great with details. Details? I laughed. But there was no humor in it. These aren't details, Tyler. This is my life, my identity, my existence as a human being separate from your needs. You're my brother, he repeated, as if that explained everything, as if that justified 40 years of one-sided relationships. And you're my ATM, I said quietly. That's all I've ever been to you. A reliable machine that dispenses money and solutions and never needs anything in return. That's not true, isn't it? Name one thing you've ever done for me, one sacrifice you've made, one time you've put my needs before your wants, one moment when you've been there for me the way I've always been there for you. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Tyler's face went through a series of expressions: defensiveness, confusion, the dawning realization that he couldn't answer the question, that in 40 years of brotherhood, the relationship had been entirely one-directional. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice small. I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize. It was easier to see me as a solution to your problems than as a person with problems of my own. He sat down heavily on my couch, his head in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might actually understand, might finally see what our relationship had become. I felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could fix this. Maybe we could find a way to be real brothers instead of user and enabler. So what am I supposed to do about the brewery? The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Even now, faced with the reality of what he'd done to our relationship, his first concern was still his business, his problems, his needs.
You're supposed to figure it out yourself. But I don't know how. I've never had to handle this kind of stuff alone. You've always been there to help me work through the complicated parts. Then maybe it's time you learned. James, please. I know I haven't been the best brother, but I need you. The brewery means everything to me. It's my chance to finally prove myself, to show everyone that I can make something work. What about my chance? Your chance? To prove myself, to show everyone that I'm more than just your support system, to finally live my own life instead of funding yours. Tyler looked at me like the concept was foreign, like the idea that I might want something for myself had never occurred to him. But you have a good life. You have a great job, this nice apartment, financial security. I have a life I built around making your life possible. Every decision I've made for the past 15 years has been filtered through the question of how it would affect your needs. I've never taken a risk because you might need my steady income. I've never pursued my dreams because you might need financial support for yours. I've never prioritized my own happiness because yours always came first. I never asked you to do that. You didn't have to ask. It was expected. By you, by mom and dad, by everyone. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who handled things. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person and became a function. Tyler was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. And for a moment, I saw the little brother I'd once protected from bullies and helped with homework and taught to ride a bike. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You can't fix it. It's too late for that. So that's it? You're just going to disappear? Leave me to figure everything out alone? Yes. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out sharper than I had intended. Tyler, I've given you over $40,000 in the past 5 years. I've worked myself into the ground to keep you afloat. I've sacrificed relationships, opportunities, dreams, my own happiness to make sure you always had what you needed. And when I finally decide to prioritize myself for once in my adult life, you think it's unfair? But what about family? What about loyalty? What about it? Where was your loyalty when I needed support? Where was your family commitment when I was working 70-hour weeks to pay your debts? Where was your concern for my happiness when you were planning to use my birthday as decoration for your grand opening? He didn't have an answer for that. How could he? The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Our relationship had been a one-way street for so long that the concept of reciprocity was foreign territory. "I love you," he said, finally, desperately. "You're my brother and I love you. You love what I do for you. You love having someone who will always be there to catch you when you fall. But you don't love me, Tyler. You don't even know me." He left without another word, and I went back to packing with tears streaming down my face. Not tears of regret or second-guessing, but tears of grief for the relationship we'd never had, the brother I'd always wanted him to be, the family dynamic that might have existed in some alternate universe where love wasn't conditional on usefulness. The calls from my parents started that evening and continued for days. Mom sobbing about how I was tearing the family apart. Dad angry and demanding, insisting I was having some kind of breakdown and needed to come to my senses. They took shifts, coordinating their emotional manipulation with the precision of a military campaign. But something had shifted in me after the conversation with Tyler. Their voices sounded different now, not like concerned family members, but like people who'd lost access to a resource they'd taken for granted. Their love had always been conditional, I realized. Conditional on my compliance, my usefulness, my willingness to sacrifice myself for Tyler's benefit. Real love didn't work that way. Real love didn't require you to disappear in order to make someone else shine. The moving truck arrived on a Thursday morning in April, 3 weeks after my birthday. I stood on the sidewalk watching strangers load my life into boxes and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement. Not anxiety about Tyler's latest crisis, not guilt about disappointing my parents, not the familiar weight of other people's expectations, just pure, uncomplicated excitement about what came next. Portland was everything I'd hoped it would be. My new apartment was smaller than the old one, but brighter, with actual windows that let in actual sunlight. The office was modern and collaborative, full of people who seemed genuinely interested in innovative solutions, rather than just maintaining the status quo. My new colleagues invited me to happy hours and asked about my weekend plans, and remembered details about my life that had nothing to do with my usefulness to them. They celebrated my 41st birthday at a brewery. The irony wasn't lost on me. With people who'd known me for less than a year, but still had remembered to ask what I wanted to do, how I wanted to celebrate, what would make the day special for me. When they sang happy birthday, they used my name instead of generic pronouns. When they asked about my life, they listened to the answers. It was the best birthday I'd had in decades. Tyler texted that week, "Brewery is closing. Need help with debt. Family emergency." I read the message twice, waiting for the familiar surge of guilt and panic, the automatic impulse to start calculating how much I could spare, which credit cards still had available limits. Instead, I felt something that might have been sadness, not for Tyler's failed business, but for the brother relationship we'd never figured out to have. I deleted the message without responding. 3 months later, I got a wedding invitation from my cousin Rebecca, the one who'd moved to Seattle after college and built a successful marketing firm from scratch. She'd tracked down my new address somehow, probably through Mom, though I doubted Mom had shared it willingly.
The invitation was beautiful, elegant, addressed to James and Guest. Rebecca had remembered that I might have
someone special in my life, that I might want to bring a date to her celebration. It was such a small thing, but it made me realize how long it had been since anyone in my family had considered my romantic life, my happiness, my needs as a whole person rather than just my function as Tyler's support system. I RSVP'd no anyway, not out of spite, but because I'd already planned a trip to Italy for that weekend. My first real vacation in over a decade, booked without consulting anyone else's schedule or needs or financial situation. The trip was a revelation. 10 days of museums and cafes and train rides through countryside that looked like paintings. 10 days of conversations with strangers who knew nothing about my family dynamics or my history as the responsible one. 10 days of being just James, not Tyler's brother, not the family ATM, not the reliable one who fixed everyone's problems. Just James. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. On the plane home, I pulled out my phone and started a new list. Things I want to do with the rest of my life. Learn photography again. I'd already bought a new camera. Travel to places I've only seen in pictures. Date someone who asks about my day and listens to the answer. Start my own consulting firm. Make friends who know my birthday without being reminded. Build a life that's mine. I was 41 years old, and I was finally ready to start living. The plane lifted off from Rome, carrying me back to Portland, back to my new life, back to the future I was building one choice at a time. Below me, the city grew small and then disappeared entirely, just like the old version of myself I'd left behind. 6 months later, I did start my own consulting firm. Small at first, just me and a virtual assistant and a handful of clients who appreciated my attention to detail and strategic thinking. Within a year, I had enough business to hire 2 junior consultants and rent actual office space. Within 2 years, I was competing for contracts with the firm I'd left behind. I never became rich, but I became something more valuable. Happy. I became someone who made decisions based on what I wanted rather than what other people needed from me. I became someone who said no when I meant no and yes when I meant yes, without filtering every choice through the question of how it would affect Tyler's well-being. I started dating again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as I remembered what it felt like to be chosen by someone who saw me more than just a solution to their problems. I met Sarah, not the architect from before, but a different Sarah, a teacher who laughed at my jokes and challenged my assumptions and never once asked me for money. We moved in together after 18 months and she threw me a surprise party for my 43rd birthday. Nothing elaborate, just pizza and friends and a homemade cake that said, "Happy birthday, James," in blue frosting. But it was mine. All mine. No one else's celebration hijacked my moment. No one else's needs took precedence over my happiness. I blew out the candles and made a wish for the wisdom to keep choosing myself, even when it was difficult. Tyler called once about 2 years after I'd moved. I was sitting in my office late on a Friday evening, reviewing quarterly reports and planning a weekend trip to the coast with Sarah, when my phone rang with the familiar number I hadn't seen in months. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "James?" His voice was different. Older, more tired, stripped of the manic enthusiasm that had characterized most of our adult conversations. "Hi, Tyler. I heard about your business. Mom told me you started your own firm." "That's right." "She said it's doing really well, that you're successful." "I'm doing okay." A long pause. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us, carried by phone signals across 1,000 miles and 3 years of silence. I waited for him to continue, to explain what he was sorry for, to demonstrate that he understood what had gone wrong between us. "I know I wasn't a good brother to you. I know I took advantage of your generosity. I know I should have been there for you the way you were always there for me." It was more self-awareness than Tyler had ever shown, but it still felt incomplete somehow, like he was apologizing for the symptoms rather than the disease. "Thank you for saying that. Are you happy?" The question surprised me. "Yes, I am." "Good. That's good. You deserve to be happy. So do you, Tyler. Yeah, well, I'm working on it. Got a job at a marketing firm downtown. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. Learning to live within my means and all that. That's great, really. Another pause. Do you think we could ever be brothers again? Real brothers, I mean? Not like before. I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe, but it would have to be different. I know. I wouldn't expect you to. I know those days are over. The money stuff. I just meant, could we maybe talk sometimes? As friends? Maybe. We could start there and see what happens. We talked for 20 more minutes, carefully and politely like strangers getting to know each other, which in many ways we were. Tyler told me about his job, his therapy sessions, his attempts to build a life that didn't depend on other people's resources. I told him about my business, about Sarah, about the photography classes I'd started taking on weekends. Neither of us mentioned our parents, the family dynamics that had shaped our relationship, or the years of resentment and misunderstanding that lay between us. Those conversations would come later, if they came at all. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to Tyler for years. Hope. Not hope that he would change completely, not hope that our relationship would magically return to some idealized version that had never actually existed, just hope that we might figure out how to be brothers in a way that worked for both of us, instead of just one of us. It was a start. I looked out my office window at the Portland skyline, at the city lights reflecting in the river, at the life I'd built from scratch in a place where no one knew my history as the reliable one. Sarah was waiting for me at home, probably cooking something delicious and planning our weekend adventure. I had work I enjoyed, friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide, and a future that belonged entirely to me. 43 years old, and I was finally, truly free. I packed up my desk, turned off the lights, and went home to my real life, the one I'd almost been too afraid to claim, but had turned out to be worth every difficult choice along the way. The story could have ended there, with Tyler's apology and the possibility of reconciliation, but life isn't that neat, that symmetrical. Real change takes time, setbacks, small victories, and gradual progress rather than dramatic revelations. Tyler did get better, slowly. Our monthly phone calls became bi-weekly, then weekly. He started asking about my life first before sharing his own news. He remembered my birthday without being reminded. Small gestures, but they mattered because they represented genuine effort to see me as a complete person rather than a resource. My parents took longer to accept the new dynamic. Mom still called occasionally, usually when Tyler was struggling with something, hoping I might offer advice or support from afar, but she no longer expected me to drop everything to solve his problems, and she'd started asking about my business, my relationship with Sarah, my life in Portland, as if it mattered independently of Tyler's needs. Dad remained distant, confused by my transformation from reliable problem solver to autonomous adult. We exchanged Christmas cards and birthday wishes, but the easy closeness we'd once shared seemed to have died with my willingness to subordinate myself to family expectations. That loss hurt more than I'd expected, but it was the price of becoming real, of insisting on being seen as more than my usefulness to other people. Some relationships couldn't survive that shift in dynamics, and I'd learned to grieve them without returning to the old patterns that had nearly cost me my identity. Sarah and I married on my 45th birthday. Her idea, actually, to turn a day that had once been about obligation and disappointment into something worth celebrating. The ceremony was small, just close friends and a few family members who'd made the effort to know us as individuals rather than functions. Tyler came, bringing flowers and a card that said, "Happy birthday and congratulations," in his own handwriting. He stayed for the whole reception, asked Sarah about her work, and didn't mention money or business ventures or personal crises once.
When he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "I'm proud of you, big brother." And for the first time in decades, I believed he meant it. My parents didn't come. They'd been invited, but Mom had called a week before the wedding with some excuse about Dad's back problems and travel being difficult. I suspected the real issue was their inability to reconcile the son they knew, the one who lived for their approval and Tyler's needs, with the man I'd become. Their absence stung, but it didn't ruin the day, because the day was mine, built around what Sarah and I wanted, rather than what anyone else expected or needed. It was a celebration of the life we were building together, the future we were choosing, the love we'd found when we were both finally brave enough to be ourselves. The business continued to grow. By my 50th birthday, I had 12 employees and clients across the country. Sarah had been promoted to principal at her school. We'd bought a house with a garden and 2 bedrooms that might someday hold children if we decided we wanted them. We traveled regularly, took weekend trips to the mountains and the coast, hosted dinner parties with friends who knew our stories and supported our dreams. It was an ordinary life in many ways, but it was extraordinary to me because it was mine. Built on choices I'd made for myself rather than compromises forced by other people's needs. Sustained by relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. Tyler visited that summer, his first trip to Portland since I'd moved. He was genuinely interested in seeing my life, meeting Sarah, understanding who I'd become in the years since I'd stopped being his financial safety net. He looked healthy, not just physically, but emotionally. Calmer, more grounded, less desperate. We went hiking in the gorge, just the 2 of us, and talked about things we'd never discussed before. His struggles with addiction in his 20s, my battles with anxiety and depression that I'd hidden behind the facade of reliability, the ways our parents' expectations had shaped us both, though differently. He said as we sat beside a waterfall, catching our breath, "I used to think you had it easy. You were so good at everything, so responsible, so together. I never realized you might be struggling too." I was good at looking together. There's a difference. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out.
He told me about the therapy that had helped him understand the patterns in our family, the way he'd been unconsciously encouraged to remain dependent while I'd been groomed to enable his dependence. He talked about learning to tolerate discomfort rather than immediately seeking someone else to fix his problems. He mentioned a girlfriend, someone he'd been dating for over a year, the longest relationship of his adult life. "She doesn't give me money," he said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Won't even lend me $20 for gas. He was weird at first, but I think it's good for me." It sounds healthy. It is hard, but healthy. I'm learning to solve my own problems instead of assuming someone else will handle them for me. We hiked in comfortable silence for a while, 2 middle-aged brothers finally learning to be friends instead of user and enabler. It wasn't the relationship we'd had as children, but it was better than anything we'd managed as adults. It was real. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused," Tyler said as we reached the car. "I know I hurt you, used you, took you for granted for years. I know saying sorry doesn't fix that." "No, it doesn't, but it's a start." "What would fix it? What would make us even?" I thought about it as we drove back toward the city, watching the Columbia River wind between the mountains. "Nothing would make us even, Tyler. That's not how it works. You can't pay back 20 years of one-sided relationships with apologies or good behavior or changed patterns." He looked stricken, and I realized he'd been hoping for some kind of formula, some way to calculate his debt and work toward paying it off. "But," I continued, "that's okay. We don't have to be even to be brothers. We just have to be honest about what happened and committed to doing better going forward." "Can you forgive me?" "I already have. That's why you're here." The forgiveness had been for my own sake as much as his. Carrying resentment was exhausting, and I'd had enough of exhaustion. I'd forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved the peace that came with letting go of anger. Tyler cried a little as we pulled into my driveway, the first time I'd seen him cry since we were children. Not the manipulative tears that had sometimes accompanied his requests for money, but genuine grief for the relationship we'd lost to dysfunction and the years we'd wasted not really knowing each other. "I want to be a better brother to you," he said. "I want to be someone you can count on instead of someone you have to manage." "Then be that person, not for me, but for yourself." He stayed for a week, and by the time he left, something had shifted between us. We weren't fully healed. That would take years if it happened at all, but we were honest. He knew me as more than a problem solver, and I knew him as more than a collection of crises requiring management. It was enough, more than enough. It was a beginning. Now, at 52, I can say with certainty that leaving was the best decision I ever made. Not just leaving my hometown, but leaving the version of myself that existed only to serve other people's needs, the reliable one, the invisible one, the one who mattered only as a function. I still talk to Tyler regularly. He's been sober for 3 years now, has a steady job he actually seems to enjoy, and is engaged to the woman who won't lend him gas money. He's planning a wedding that he's paying for himself, and he's asked me to be his best man, not because he needs my help organizing things, but because he wants me there as his brother.
I said yes. My parents and I have found a cautious peace. They still don't entirely understand my choices, but they've stopped trying to convince me to move back home and resume my role as Tyler's caretaker. Mom sends birthday cards that arrive on the correct date. Dad calls occasionally to ask about my business, and sometimes he even listens to the answers. Sarah and I never did have children, but we have a full life anyway. We've traveled to 37 countries, adopted 2 rescue dogs, and built a marriage based on partnership rather than need. She knows my whole story, including the parts I'm not proud of, and loves me anyway. Not for what I can provide or how I can help her, but for who I am when I'm not trying to be useful to anyone else. My consulting firm is thriving. I've written 2 books about organizational psychology and speak at conferences around the country about building healthy workplace cultures. The irony isn't lost on me. The skills I developed managing my dysfunctional family dynamics turned out to be exactly what corporations needed to improve their own systems. But the real victory isn't professional success or financial independence, or even the healthy relationships I've built. The real victory is simple. I like who I am now. I recognize myself in the mirror. I make decisions based on what I want, rather than what other people need from me. I am no longer invisible in my own life. Last week, I got an email from a stranger, a woman in her 30s who'd read one of my articles about family dynamics and enabling behaviors. She told me her story, which sounded familiar. The responsible daughter who'd been funding her brother's dreams for years, the family who saw her as a resource rather than a person, and the growing resentment and loss of identity that came with always putting everyone else first. "How did you find the courage to leave?" she asked. "How did you know it was the right choice?" I wrote back, "You'll know it's time when staying hurts more than leaving. When being useful to other people matters less than being real to yourself. When you realize that love shouldn't require you to disappear." Then I added, "The courage comes later. First, you just have to be tired enough of being invisible to take the first step." Because that's what it really comes down to in the end. Not dramatic confrontations or elaborate revenge fantasies or perfectly planned escapes. Just the quiet decision to stop participating in your own erasure. To stop being the reliable one long enough to figure out who you are underneath all that usefulness. To finally put yourself first. It's never too late to start. I was 40 when I figured it out, but I've heard from people who made the change at 60, 70, 80. The age doesn't matter. What matters is the recognition that you matter, not just as a solution to other people's problems, but as a whole person worthy of love, attention, and care. What matters is the decision to stop being invisible in your own life. What matters is choosing yourself, even when it's difficult, even when other people don't understand, even when it means disappointing the people who've grown comfortable with your self-sacrifice. Especially then. Your life is waiting for you to claim it. All you have to do is be brave enough to step out of the shadows and into the light of your own story. Happy birthday to you, whenever that might be. I hope someone remembers.